There is a piano in the corner of an old apartment in Warsaw, Poland. It has been there for decades. The wood is dark and scratched in places. A few of the keys have gone slightly yellow with age. One of the pedals sticks if you press it too hard. It is not a beautiful piano, not the kind you would find on a concert stage or in a fancy music school. But every Sunday afternoon, without fail, an old woman named Zofia sits down on the small bench in front of it and plays. She plays Chopin. Not for anyone, not for applause, just because the music lives somewhere inside her and it needs to get out. The apartment smells like tea and old books. The curtains are the thick kind that block most of the afternoon light, so the room stays dim and warm even on bright days. There is a photograph on top of the piano. A young Zofia, maybe 30 years old, sitting at the same instrument, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. The photo has faded to a soft brown color now, but the smile is still clear. This is the world that a 7-year-old girl named Hania grew up stepping into every Sunday. Hania is small for her age. She has dark eyes that notice everything, the kind of eyes that stay very still when something interesting is happening, like a camera holding its focus. She is not a loud child. She does not run into rooms. She tends to walk in quietly, look around first, and then decide where she belongs. On most Sundays, she belongs next to her grandmother. She would climb up onto the bench. It was too tall for her feet to reach the floor, and sit beside Zofia with her hands folded in her lap. She did not talk during the music. She did not ask questions or fidget or look at the door. She just listened, with that very still face of hers, like someone hearing something important being said in a language they are just beginning to understand. The piece Zofia played most often was a Chopin Nocturne. It is a slow, quiet piece, the kind of music that does not rush anywhere. It rises and falls like breathing. It has sad parts and gentle parts, and sometimes a phrase that sounds almost like a question being asked very softly into the dark. Hania did not know what any of that meant at 7 years old. She did not know who Chopin was, or what a nocturne was, or why certain notes made her chest feel tight in a way that was not unpleasant. She just knew that when her grandmother played, the whole apartment felt different, like something invisible had changed in the air. One Sunday, when the last note finally faded and Zofia lifted her hands from the keys, Hania turned to her and asked the question that would quietly change the direction of her life. "Can I try?" Zofia did not say "you re too young," or "let me show you first," or "wait until you have lessons." She simply slid a little to the right on the bench and made room. Hania looked at the keys for a moment. Then she pressed one. A single note came out, soft and round and clear. She pressed it again. Then she pressed the one next to it, and then the one next to that. She was not playing anything. Not a song or a melody. Just sounds, one after another, slowly and carefully, the way a child might touch objects on a shelf, not to take anything, just to feel what each one is. But here is the thing that Zofia noticed. Hania was not playing randomly. Without knowing it, without any instruction or guidance, she was pressing keys that sounded like they belonged together. Not perfectly, not in any order that a music teacher would recognize. But there was something there, some instinct reaching toward something, the way a plant grows toward a window without knowing what light is, only that it is needed. Zofia watched her granddaughter's face. That little brow was furrowed. That jaw was set. It was the face of someone taking something very seriously. "Do you like it?" Zofia asked. Hania pressed another key. Then she looked up. "I want to learn the one you play," she said. "The slow one," Zofia smiled. It was the smile of someone who recognizes something, not because they planned for it, but because they have been alive long enough to know it when they see it. That evening, Hania's parents had a conversation. Her father, Tomasz, was a practical man. He worked long hours at an engineering firm and believed deeply in things that could be measured, in deadlines and results and clear plans. He was not unkind, but he was the type of person who needed a reason before he could believe in something. Her mother, Beja, was different. She had grown up in a house full of music. Her own mother had sung in a choir for 30 years, and she had always felt a small private sadness that she had never pursued it herself. When Zofia called that evening and described the way Hania had sat at the piano, the way she had listened, the way she had pressed those keys, Beja felt something shift in her. We should get her lessons, she said. Tomasz was not against it. He just wanted to make sure it was the right thing. She's 7, he said. She liked pressing some keys. That's not the same as wanting to play piano. I know, Beja said, but I also know that look she had. I've seen that look before. When she found that book about birds last year, she read it 4 times, so they enrolled her. The music school was about 20 minutes away by tram, a solid stone building that had been a school of some kind for over 100 years. The hallways always had the sound of something happening somewhere. A violin, a trumpet, a voice doing scales up and down, up and down. It smelled like rosin and old wood. Hania's teacher was a man named Mr. Winiewski. He was tall, and he moved slowly and with great care, the way people do who have spent their whole lives in rooms where noise must be controlled. He was in his 60s. His hair was silver and neatly combed. He wore the same style of cardigan every lesson, just in different colors. He had been teaching piano for over 30 years, and he was, by every honest measure, a very good teacher. He sat Hania down at the practice piano in his small studio and looked at her hands. He turned them over, looked at the length of her fingers, the width of her palms. He did this matter-of-factly, not unkindly, the way a craftsman checks his materials before starting a project. Have you played before? He asked. A little, Hania said. At my grandmother's. Can you show me anything? She thought for a moment. Then she placed her right hand on the keys and played 4 notes. The beginning of the Nocturne, the phrase she had heard so many times that it had taken root in her memory without her even trying. The notes were not even. The third one was slightly too loud and the last one too short. But they were the right 4 notes in the right order from a piece she had never been taught and could not name. Mr. Winiewski raised his eyebrows just slightly. He wrote something down in his notebook. The first few lessons were simple. Hand position, posture, how to sit, how to hold the wrists, what the names of the notes were. Standard stuff. The kind of beginning that every student goes through, no matter how gifted. Hania was patient with all of it, but there was one part she always looked forward to. The last 5 minutes of each lesson, when sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, Mr. Winiewski would sit down and play something himself. Just briefly, just as a demonstration. But those 5 minutes were the part Hania thought about on the tram ride home. She practiced at home on her grandmother's piano. Zofia had offered it without being asked. She had simply called Beja one afternoon and said the piano was Hania's to use whenever she wanted. Tomasz moved a chair from the kitchen so Hania could sit at the right height. Her feet still did not touch the pedals. They would not for another 2 years. She practiced with the kind of focus that is almost strange to see in a child. Not because she was told to, not because her parents sat beside her and watched the clock, but because she wanted to. She would play a phrase, stop, play it again, stop, play it again. Not rushing to get through it, not trying to reach the end. Just sitting with it, the way her grandmother sat with the music, like it was company worth keeping. Some evenings, Zofia would come over for dinner, and after they ate, the 2 of them, the old woman and the small girl, would sit together at the piano bench. Zofia would play something slowly, and Hania would watch her hands, not to copy immediately, but just to see, to understand what fingers moving with confidence looked like, what it looked like when someone was not thinking about the notes anymore and was just playing. You watch like you're trying to memorize something, Zofia told her once. I am, Hania said. Zofia laughed. It was a full laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere warm. Those Sunday afternoons, the dim apartment, the old piano, the smell of tea, the sound of the Nocturne moving through the quiet, became something Hania carried inside her, not just as a memory, but as a direction. The way a compass doesn't tell you everything about the road ahead, but at least tells you which way is north. She was 7 years old. She had no idea what was coming, not the doubt, not the failure, not the years of trying and not quite getting there. She did not know that someone she trusted would one day tell her, gently and with the best of intentions, that she was not built for this. She did not know how much that would cost her, or how long it would take to find her way back. All she knew in that fall of 1999, sitting beside her grandmother on a bench with her feet dangling above the floor and her small hands resting on yellowed keys was that something in this music was speaking to her. And she intended to answer. Nobody tells you what doubt actually feels like when it first arrives. You think it would come loudly, like a door slamming, or someone saying something sharp and cruel that you remember word for the rest of your life. But most of the time, it does not work like that. Most of the time, doubt arrives quietly, the way cold air comes into a room through a gap under the door. You do not notice it right away. You just start to feel, slowly, that something has changed, that the room does not feel the way it used to. For Hania, the cold air started coming in on a Tuesday afternoon in January. She was 7.5 years old. She had been taking lessons with Mr. Vinievsky for about 3 months. 3 months is not very long. But in those 3 months, she had done what any child with a real love for something does. She had thrown herself into it completely, without holding anything back. She practiced every day. She listened carefully in lessons. She asked questions that sometimes surprised Mr. Vinievsky, because they were not the questions a beginner usually asks. They were not questions like, which finger do I use here? Or, how long is a quarter note? They were questions like, why does this part feel sad? And what was Chopin thinking when he wrote this? Big questions. Questions that came from someone trying to understand music from the inside, not just learn it from the outside. Mr. Vinievsky was a patient man, and he answered as best he could. But somewhere in those early months, something else was also happening, something that neither Hania nor her parents could fully see yet, because they were too close to it. Hania was struggling in ways that other children her age were not. It was not obvious at first. In a beginner class, everyone struggles. Everyone plays the wrong note sometimes. Everyone loses the tempo or forgets which hand does what. That is completely normal, and nobody thinks twice about it. But as the weeks passed, and the other children in the school began to move forward, slowly, unevenly, but forward, Hania kept returning to the same places. There was a short exercise, only 8 bars long, that Mr. Vinievsky had given her in the 2nd month. A simple thing, the kind of thing a child should be able to play cleanly after a few weeks of practice. Hania had practiced it every single day. She knew it by heart. She could hear it perfectly in her head, the right rhythm, the right weight on each note, the right flow from one phrase to the next. But when her hands went to play it, something got lost between her mind and her fingers. It was not that she did not know what to do. It was that her body would not consistently do what she knew. One day, her right hand would rush ahead. The next day, her left hand would be too stiff. Some days, she would play the whole thing almost perfectly and feel a rush of something like relief. And then the very next day, it would fall apart again for no reason she could identify. She told Mr. Vinievsky once that it felt like trying to pour water into a bottle with a very small opening. She knew where the water needed to go. She could see it clearly. But so much of it kept spilling. He nodded when she said this. He wrote something in his notebook. He did not say much. The lessons continued. Winter turned into early spring. The trees outside the music school began to show small green buds on their branches, and Hania kept coming, twice a week, with her bag on her back and her lunch finished on the tram ride over, always slightly early, always ready. She wanted so badly to get it right. That was never in question. There was not a single lesson where she came in unprepared or distracted or unbothered. Other children sometimes came in having barely practiced. Some of them rolled their eyes a little at scales. Some of them watched the clock. Not Hania. Hania came in every time like it mattered, because to her, it genuinely did. But wanting something very much does not always make you good at it quickly. And the gap between how hard she was trying and how much progress she was making was beginning to show. One afternoon in late March, Mr. Vinievsky asked her to play the 8-bar exercise one more time. She played it. Her right hand rushed in the 4th bar. She stopped, went back, played it again. Her left hand was too quiet this time. She stopped again. She played it a 3rd time, and it was almost right, almost even. Almost the thing she could hear so clearly in her head. Almost. She looked up at him when she finished. He looked back at her for a moment over his silver-rimmed glasses. Then he said they would move on to the next thing. But the way he said it, not encouraging, not disappointed either, just careful, stayed with her on the tram ride home. A few weeks after that, her parents received a phone call from the school asking if they could come in for a brief conversation. Not a big formal meeting, just a chat after Hania's next lesson. Hania waited in the hallway while her parents went into Mr. Wieniawski's studio. She sat on a wooden bench near the door with her coat on her lap. Down the hall, someone was playing violin scales. Up and down, the same pattern over and over, very clean, very even, without a single mistake. She could not hear what was being said inside. She could only hear the low sound of voices, her mother's, her father's, Mr. Wieniawski's. Nobody sounded angry. Nobody raised their voice. It was a calm conversation, a careful one. She already knew it was about her. When her parents came out, their faces were doing the thing that adult faces do when they have just heard something they have not yet decided how to handle. A kind of arranged stillness, friendly on the surface, but busy underneath. Her mother took her hand and said they should head home for dinner. Her father carried her bag. They talked on the tram about other things. What they would eat, something funny that had happened at his office, whether spring was finally arriving for good this year. Normal things, warm things. Things that had nothing to do with what had just been said in that small studio. But Hania was 7.5, not 17. And even at 7.5, she was the kind of child who noticed the space around conversations, not just the conversations themselves. She did not ask what Mr. Wieniawski had said that evening. She ate her dinner and did her homework and got ready for bed without asking. But she lay awake for a while that night in the dark, listening to the sounds of the apartment, the faint noise of the street below, her parents talking quietly in the next room, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. She thought about the 8 bars. She played them through in her head, slowly, the way they were supposed to sound. Perfect in her mind. Exactly right. She could hear every note, every tiny space between them, the way the left hand and right hand were supposed to meet and match each other. She played it in her head 3 times, perfectly, and then she fell asleep. She did not know yet what Mr. Wieniawski had told her parents. She would not know the exact words for a long time. But what he had said, gently and carefully, the way a man says something difficult when he genuinely believes he is doing the right thing, was this: Hania was a sweet child. She worked hard. She clearly loved music. But after 3 months of close observation, he did not believe she had natural musical ability. Her rhythm was inconsistent in ways that practice alone was not fixing. Her motor coordination at the piano was below what he typically saw at her age. She was not progressing the way children with natural aptitude progressed. He had seen a great many students in 30 years, and he knew the difference, not always, not with certainty, but usually, between a child who is a late starter and a child who is simply not built for the instrument. He did not want them to waste their time or their money. He did not want Hania to spend years struggling and feeling like she was failing at something. He thought it would be better, kinder, even, to point her towards something else before she became too attached. Her parents did not tell Hania any of this directly. They were protecting her, the way parents do, from a pain they did not know how to soften. But over the following weeks, small things began to change around her. Brochures appeared on the kitchen counter. One for a swimming club. One for a children's drawing workshop that met on Saturday mornings. Her father mentioned casually one evening that a friend's daughter had started gymnastics and loved it. Her mother asked once, lightly, whether Hania had any interest in learning a different instrument, something smaller, easier to carry. Hania answered each of these things politely. She looked at the brochures. She said the drawing workshop sounded nice. She did not fight or argue or cry, but she kept going to lessons. Twice a week, bag on her back, lunch finished on the tram, always slightly early. She did not tell anyone why she kept going. She did not have the words for it yet. She just knew that when she sat down at her grandmother's piano in the dim apartment on Sunday afternoons, something in her chest loosened. Something that had been held tight all week was allowed to open up a little. She did not have a name for that feeling. She just knew she was not ready to give it up because someone had decided it was not meant for her. And so the doubt lived in the apartment, now, quiet and uninvited, sitting in the corner the way the piano sat in the corner of Zofia's living room. Present, heavy, impossible to ignore entirely. But Hania kept sitting down at the keys. She kept playing, and the doubt, for now, at least, had not yet won. There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It is not the tired you feel after a long day or a hard week. It is the tired that comes from trying, really trying, with everything you have, and still not getting there. It settles into you differently than regular exhaustion. It does not go away after a good night's rest. It lives somewhere deeper, in that quiet part of you that keeps track of all the times you reached for something and came back empty-handed. Hania knew that feeling by the time she was 9 years old. Not because she had given up. She had not. If anything, she had done the opposite. After that conversation between her parents and Mr. Wieniewski, the one she was not supposed to know about, but understood anyway, something in her had gone very still and very determined at the same time. Like a small fire that someone had tried to blow out, and instead of going dark, it had just pulled itself in tighter and burned more quietly. She practiced more, not because anyone told her to, not because there was a recital coming, or a test, or any kind of deadline. She practiced because she needed to prove something, not to Mr. Wieniewski, not to her parents, but to herself, to that small, honest voice inside her that was still not entirely sure whether she could do this. She went from practicing 40 minutes a day to practicing 2 hours, then 2.5. She started waking up 20 minutes earlier in the mornings so she could sit at Zofia's piano before school. Her grandmother would come out in her housecoat with 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for Hania, and sit in the armchair nearby, not saying anything, just being present, just being company. Those early morning sessions were some of the most peaceful moments of that whole difficult stretch. Just the 2 of them, the dark windows, the tea going cold on the side table, the piano filling the room with something that felt almost like hope. But hope, it turned out, was not enough to fix what needed fixing. The problems that Mr. Wieniewski had identified were still there. Hania could feel them herself. That was the hardest part. She was not someone who could not hear the difference between right and wrong. She heard it perfectly. She knew exactly when her right hand rushed, when her left hand was too heavy, when the rhythm lost its evenness and became slightly ragged at the edges. She heard all of it. She just could not seem to stop it from happening. It was like knowing a word in a foreign language, perfectly in your head, but when you open your mouth, something different comes out. The knowledge was there. The intention was there. But somewhere between her brain and her fingers, something kept getting lost in translation. She tried everything she could think of. She practiced with her eyes closed, hoping that removing one distraction would help her focus on the physical feeling of each key. She practiced at a pace so slow, it barely sounded like music. Just one note, then a pause, then the next, building up like bricks. She practiced her left hand alone for a full week, refusing to bring the right hand in until the left one felt solid. Then she practiced her right hand alone for a week. Then she tried to put them back together, and the same uneven rhythm returned like an old habit that had just been waiting patiently for her to stop paying attention. She did not cry about it at home. She kept her frustration private, the way she kept most things private. But sometimes, after a particularly difficult practice session, she would sit very still at the piano for a minute, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the keys, not playing, not thinking about playing, just sitting with the weight of it. Zofia, from her armchair, would watch those moments. She never rushed in with words. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some kinds of frustration need to be felt before they can be moved through. The first recital came in the spring, just before Hania turned 9. It was a small event, nothing enormous, just the music school's end-of-term gathering, held in a medium-sized hall with wooden chairs and parents, sitting in rows holding little programs printed on pale yellow paper. Every student played one piece. The pieces got slightly longer and more complicated as the older children went up, but even the youngest ones had something prepared. Hania had been practicing her piece, a short, simple work by Clementi, one of those tidy little compositions that sounds almost cheerful, for 2 full months. She had played it at home hundreds of times. Some of those times it was quite good. Some of those times it was nearly there. On the best days, sitting at Sophia's piano, with the morning light beginning to come through the curtains, it felt possible. It felt like something real. She sat in the third row of the audience and waited for her turn. Her hands were cold, which surprised her. The hall was not cold at all. It was full of people and the warmth that comes with them. But her hands did not know that. They had gone cold on their own. When her name was called, she walked to the piano with a straight back, the way Mr. Wieniawski had always told her to. She sat down, adjusted the bench just slightly, put her hands in her lap for one breath, the way she had been taught, and then placed her fingers on the keys. She played the first 2 bars. They were fine. Not perfect, but fine. Then the third bar came, and something happened, not in her hands, but in her head. A kind of noise. A sudden bright awareness of the room around her, of all the people sitting in the rows of the pale yellow, programs in their hands of her mother and father, somewhere behind her of the silence that an audience makes, that is different from any other kind of silence, because it is waiting. Her right hand rushed. She stopped. The hall went very quiet in that specific, uncomfortable way that happens when something goes wrong on a stage. Not a cruel quiet. Just a surprised one. The kind that takes up a lot of space. She started from the beginning of the bar. Her right hand rushed again, into the same place, like it was following a road it had learned before she had time to unlearn it. She stopped again. A teacher came from the side of the stage, quietly, carefully, the way you approach something that might startle, and stood beside her for a moment. There were a few whispered words. Then Hania stood up from the bench, and the teacher walked with her back to her seat in the third row. The audience did what audiences do in those moments. They moved on, adjusted, turned their attention to the next name on the program. Some of the parents gave Hania small sympathetic smiles as she sat back down. She did not return them. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the stage and her face very composed, the way she had taught herself to look when she did not want anyone to see what was happening inside. Her mother reached over and put a hand on her arm. Hania did not pull away, but she also did not respond. She just kept watching the stage. She cried in the bathroom afterwards, the kind of crying that is fast and silent and leaves your eyes red, but your face mostly dry, the kind that has been held back for so long, it does not know how to come out slowly. 15 minutes. Alone in a stall, with the noise of the hallway muffled through the door and the distant sound of the last few students still playing in the hall. Then she came out. She washed her hands. She looked in the mirror for a moment. She went back out into the corridor, found her parents and her grandmother, and watched the rest of the recital, standing near the wall with a straight back and a face that had decided to be all right. Zofia stood beside her and said nothing. But at one point she put her arm around Hania's shoulder, and Hania leaned into her, just slightly, just for a moment, before straightening up again. The months after the recital were harder in a quieter way. She kept practicing. She kept going to lessons. But something had shifted in the texture of how she worked at the piano. She became more mechanical, more technical, more focused on fixing specific things, and less connected to the reason she had started in the first place. Every practice session became a kind of test she was giving herself, and she was never quite passing it. Mr. Wieniawski's lessons became more corrective. He was not harsh. He was never harsh, but the lessons were full of stopping and adjusting and going back. There was less music in them and more repair work. More here, like this, and try it again, and the left hand needs to come down softer. Hania absorbed all of it. She applied every correction faithfully. She tried each adjustment and worked at it until she understood what he was asking for. And sometimes she got it. For a few bars, for a few moments, she would play something, and it would sound right, actually right. Not almost, but right. Those moments were like small lights in a long corridor. They were enough to keep her walking, but they never lasted long enough to become the whole piece. Every time she would feel herself getting close, something would slip. The performance of the whole was always slightly beyond the reach of all her careful separate parts. At 11 years old, after 4 years of lessons, 4 years of morning practice, and 2-hour sessions and corrections and recitals and trying, she came home from a lesson on a gray Thursday afternoon, dropped her bag by the door, walked down the hall to her grandmother's apartment. They had moved into the same building by then, 2 floors apart, and sat down at the piano. She did not play anything. She just sat there, hands in her lap, eyes on the keys. The room was quiet. The curtains were half open, and the late afternoon light came through in that flat, gray, neither here nor there way it does in autumn. Sophia came in after a little while, as she always seemed to know to do. She sat down beside Hania on the bench without saying anything. They sat together in the quiet for a long time. Then Sophia asked her question, the same one that would turn out to matter more than anything Mr. Wieniawski had ever written in his notebook, more than any correction, more than any technique or exercise or scale. She asked it simply and without drama, the way she asked most things. "What do you hear," Sophia said, "when you don't play?" Hania did not answer, not that evening. She did not have the answer yet. But the question stayed with her, not on the surface of her mind, where thoughts move quickly and disappear, but underneath, where things settle and slowly begin to mean something. She had been trying so hard to fix what was broken that she had almost forgotten to listen to what was still whole. Something was about to change. She just did not know it yet. Sometimes the thing that saves you does not look like saving at first. It does not arrive with a big announcement. It does not come wrapped in something that looks like an answer. Most of the time it arrives sideways, through a door you did not know was there, in a conversation you did not expect to matter, on an ordinary afternoon when you are not looking for anything at all. For Hania, it arrived in the form of a woman named Dr. Kowalczyk, but before that, things had to get a little worse. The autumn that Hania turned 11 was a gray season in more ways than one. School had become harder, not because she was not bright, she was, but because the same difficulty that lived in her piano playing had started showing up in other places too. Writing quickly during class, copying things from the board, moving from one physical task to another without losing her place. Small things that most children did automatically, without thinking, were things Hania had to think about carefully every single time. She had always been this way. She just had not had a name for it yet. Her class teacher noticed it first, not in a critical way, but in the way a good teacher notices when a child is working twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up. She mentioned it to the school's support coordinator. The coordinator spoke with Hania's parents. And a few weeks later, Hania found herself sitting in a small, warm office on the second floor of a building near her school, across a low table from Dr. Ewa Kowalczyk. Dr. Kowalczyk was not what Hania expected. She had expected someone clinical, someone with a clipboard and a list of questions delivered in a flat, professional voice, the kind of appointment that felt more like being measured than being met. Instead, Dr. Kowalczyk was a small woman in her 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a cluttered desk that had at least 4 half-grown cups of tea on it in various stages of cooling. Her office had plants on every windowsill and a very old, slightly wonky bookshelf that looked like it was held together, mostly by the weight of the books inside it. She did not start with questions about school. She started by asking Hania what she liked. Just that. What do you like? Hania, who had been preparing herself for something more serious, was caught slightly off guard. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "Music." Dr. Kowalczyk tilted her head. Not the polite tilt of someone being courteous. The real tilt of someone who has just become genuinely curious. She asked Hania to tell her more. And so, in that warm, cluttered office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, Hania told her about the piano, about her grandmother's apartment and the old upright with the sticky pedal, about the Nocturne she had been trying to learn since she was 7, about the lessons and the recital and the 8 bars that never came out the way they sounded in her head, about the gap, that persistent, exhausting gap between what she could hear and what her hands would actually do. Dr. Kowalczyk listened without interrupting. She did not write anything down while Hania was talking. She just listened, the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak, but are actually taking in every word. When Hania finished, Dr. Kowalczyk was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It sounds like the music is completely alive in your mind. But something happens between your mind and your hands." Hania looked at her. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." Dr. Kowalczyk nodded slowly. She picked up one of the cooling cups of tea, realized it was too cold, and put it back down. "I'd like to do some assessments with you over the next few weeks," she said, "not to find out what's wrong with you." There's nothing wrong with you. But I think we might be able to find out why the road between your head and your hands is a bit longer than it is for some other people. And if we know why, we might be able to build a better road. The assessments took 3 weeks. They were not unpleasant. Some of them felt almost like games, patterns and sequences and tasks that tested how Hania's brain organized movement, how quickly she could translate thought into physical action, how she processed rhythm and timing. The result was a diagnosis that Hania had never heard of before: developmental coordination disorder. Dr. Kowalczyk explained it carefully, in simple words, without making it sound frightening or final. The brain, she said, has different pathways for different tasks. For most people, the pathway between planning a movement and carrying it out is short and fast, almost automatic, like a reflex. For people with this condition, that pathway is longer and requires more conscious effort. It does not mean the brain is less capable. It means it is wired differently, and it needs a different kind of map. Hania sat with this information for a long time after that appointment. Not sadly, or not only sadly, partly with a feeling she had not expected, which was relief. Because for 4 years she had been secretly wondering if she was simply not trying hard enough. If the gap between her mind and her fingers was a character flaw, a weakness, a sign that she did not actually want it enough. And now someone was telling her, with evidence, with careful professional certainty, that this was not the case, that she had been trying hard enough all along, that she had actually been trying harder than most people would need to. She told her grandmother that evening. Zofia listened. Then she said, "I wondered." Hania looked at her. "You knew?" "I did not know," Zofia said, "but I wondered, because I watched you practice. And I never once saw someone who was not trying. I only ever saw someone who was trying in a way that was not quite working yet. Not quite working yet." 4 words that contained a whole different future from the one Hania had been afraid of. Dr. Kowalczyk referred Hania to a specialist, a pianist and music educator named Piotr, who had spent 15 years working with students who had motor and learning differences. He was a quiet, unhurried man, the kind who never raised his voice and never seemed rattled. He had a way of sitting beside the piano bench, not on it, but in a chair pulled up close. That made him feel less like a teacher and more like a thoughtful companion on a shared problem. From the very first session, Piotr turned everything around. He did not start with the notes. He did not start with hand position or wrist angle or any of the technical corrections that Hania had been absorbing for 4 years. He started with the story. He asked her what she knew about Chopin, about who he actually was, not the name, not the composer, but the person, where he came from, what his life had felt like, what he had loved and what he had lost, and what the world had looked and sounded like to him in the years when he was writing the music Hania was trying to play. Hania knew some of it already. Zofia had told her pieces of it over the years, in the way grandmothers share things in small pieces over time. But Piotr went deeper. He told her about Chopin's homesickness, how he had left Poland as a young man and spent the rest of his life longing for it, carrying it inside him like something he could not put down. He told her about the Nocturne specifically, how they were written late at night, how they were meant to feel like the hour between waking and sleep, when the whole world goes quiet, and the things you feel most deeply are the things you cannot say out loud in the ordinary light of day. Hania sat and listened, and something in her chest recognized all of it. Then Piotr said, "Before you play a single note of this piece, I want you to know what it is." Not technically. It was such a different question from anything she had ever been asked in a music lesson that she did not answer it right away. She thought about it for days. She thought about it at school, and on the tram, and lying in bed at night. What is the music saying? She came back the following week, and she told him, "It sounds like missing something. Like you are somewhere safe and warm, but you are thinking about a place or a person you cannot get back to. It is not a crying kind of sadness." She played the opening phrase of the Nocturne. It was not perfect. Her right hand still had a small unevenness in the 3rd bar. But something was different, something essential. There was a quality to the sound she had never managed to produce before. A kind of intention, a direction, a feeling inside the notes, rather than just the notes themselves. The music had weight to it. The months that followed were not easy, but they were different from every difficult stretch that had come before. Because now, the work had a direction. Piotr restructured everything. Instead of practicing full pieces, Hania practiced small emotional phrases, 2 or 3 bars at a time, always beginning with the feeling first and the note second. Instead of drilling technique in isolation, she learned technique in the context of expression. This is how you shape the note to sound like longing. This is how you let a phrase breathe like a sigh. Her motor pathway was still longer than most. That did not change overnight. But when she came at the music through feeling first, through story and meaning and emotional intention, her body seemed to follow more willingly. The road between her mind and her hands was still longer, but now she had a reason to walk it. And reasons, it turned out, make a great deal of difference to how well your legs carry you. Mr. Wieniawski was skeptical. He had been teaching for 30 years, and he had a method that worked for most students, and this was not it. But Hania's parents asked him to be patient, and to his credit, he was. 8 months after her first session with Piotr, a small informal evening was organized at the music school. Not a recital, nothing formal, nothing with programs on yellow paper and parents in rows. Hania put her name down. She chose the Nocturne, her grandmother's piece. When the evening came, she sat down at the piano without rushing, without adjusting the bench 3 times, without the cold hands. She put her hands in her lap for one breath. She thought about Chopin, about the homesickness, about the late nights, about the quiet that holds the things you feel most deeply. She let the feeling come first, then she played. She played the whole piece, not flawlessly. It breathed. Several people in the room went still in the way that Hania had gone still all those years ago, beside her grandmother. The way you go still when something is actually reaching you. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Mr. Wieniawski was sitting near the back. He had come without being asked, which was not something he usually did for informal evenings. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his silver-rimmed glasses catching the light, and he was quiet for longer than anyone else. Then he said, not loudly, not to the room, but just to himself, and yet clearly enough that the people near him heard it. I was wrong about her. 4 years. The music that had always been inside her had finally found its way out. There is a moment after something hard is finally over when the world goes very quiet. Not empty. You do not always notice it right away. You are so used to the weight that even after it lifts, your body keeps bracing for it. You keep waiting for the difficulty to return. And then one day you realize it has not come back. And slowly, carefully, you allow yourself to believe that maybe the worst of it is behind you. Hania had that feeling on the morning after the informal evening at the music school. She woke up before her alarm. The apartment was still dark and quiet. She lay in bed for a few minutes and replayed the previous evening in her mind, not anxiously, not picking it apart for mistakes, but just letting it sit there. The room. She got up, went down 2 floors to her grandmother's apartment, made herself tea the way Zofia had taught her, loose leaves, not bags, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, and sat down at the old upright piano in the corner. She played the Nocturne from beginning to end. She played it for no one, just herself, and the early morning, and the apartment that still smelled like the same tea and old books it had always smelled like. And when she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, and for the first time in years, she did not hear the list of things that needed fixing. She just heard the music. It was a small thing. The years that followed were not without difficulty. Hania still had days at the piano that frustrated her. She still had moments where the coordination that came naturally to others required concentrated effort from her. Her path through music was never going to be identical to the paths taken by people whose brains were wired differently. But she understood herself now. And understanding yourself, really understanding, not just suspecting or hoping, but actually knowing, changes the nature of every difficulty you face after that. The obstacles do not disappear. They just stop being mysterious. And obstacles that are not mysterious can be worked with, planned around, approached with the right tools. She continued her lessons. She continued working with Piotr on the feeling-first approach that had unlocked something in her. She sat her music exams, not always at the top of the results, but always with a seriousness and a depth of interpretation that her examiners noted. One of them wrote on her assessment, "Technically developing, but musically she understands more than her age suggests." It was the kind of feedback that would have been invisible, buried under a low mark in a different world, but Hania kept it. She folded it and put it in the small wooden box on her desk where she kept things that mattered. By the time she was 17, she had made a decision. Not about performing. She wanted to work with children who had been told the same thing she had been told. She wanted to sit across a low table from a small, serious child who loved something deeply and had been told they were not built for it, and she wanted to help them find their way to it anyway. She applied to study music therapy. Her father, Tomish, was quiet when she told him. He was still the practical man he had always been, the man who needed a reason before he could believe in something. But he had watched his daughter for 10 years. He had watched her sit at that piano in the mornings before school, and on the evenings after hard days, and on the Sunday afternoons when things were not going well, anywhere else. He had watched her not quit when quitting would have been the easier and perhaps even the wiser choice. He had watched her find her way through something that most people would have walked away from long before. He did not need much convincing. "You will be very good at it," he said, and for Tomish, that was a speech. She studied for 4 years. The work was demanding, not just the music side, which she loved, but the psychology, the child development theory, the clinical practice, the learning to sit with someone else's pain without trying to immediately fix it. That last part was something she had to work at. She was, by nature, a problem solver. She had spent years solving the problem of herself. But therapy is not about solving people. It is about accompanying them, walking beside them through the difficult parts, not ahead of them. She got better at it. She became good at quiet, good at waiting, good at asking the kind of question that does not tell anyone the answer, but creates the space in which the person can find it themselves. She thought of Zofia when she practiced that. What do you hear when you don't play? She understood now what her grandmother had been doing with that question. She had not been offering advice or comfort or a technique. She had been directing Hania back to herself, back to the things she already knew, but had lost contact with under all the layers of correction and doubt and trying. The question was not really about sound. It was about remembering why you started. Hania carried that question into every session she ever had with every child who sat across from her. She began working in a small therapy practice attached to a children's support center in Warsaw. Most of her clients were between 6 and 14 years old. Many of them had conditions similar to hers. Coordination differences, processing differences, learning profiles that did not fit neatly into the standard shape of how children are expected to learn. Some of them had been told directly that music was not for them. Some of them had simply stopped trying without anyone ever saying a word, because they had felt the distance between what they wanted and what their hands would do, and had quietly concluded that the distance was permanent. Hania knew that feeling. She knew it from the inside, in a way that no textbook had ever been able to give her. And the children she worked with could tell. There is something that happens when you talk to someone who has actually been where you are. Not someone who has read about it or studied it or can describe it accurately with clinical language. Someone who has sat in the same confusion, felt the same particular shame of trying hard and still not getting there, heard the same kinds of words that made them wonder if the thing they loved was simply not for them. When children sensed that Hania was that person, something in them relaxed. Some wall that they had built to protect themselves from more disappointment came down. Just a little. Just enough. She worked with a boy of 8 who had stopped speaking in music class because he was too afraid of playing the wrong note. She worked with a girl of 10 who cried every time she had to perform anything in front of anyone. Not from shyness, but from the terror of her body not doing what she told it to. She worked with a 12-year-old who had taught himself 3 songs on the guitar entirely by ear, but refused to take lessons because a teacher had once told him his rhythm was broken. She helped all of them, not by fixing them, not by discovering some technique that bypassed the difficulty, but by sitting with them in the hard part, by refusing to agree that the distance between their mind and their hands meant the music was not for them, by finding the door that was shaped for them specifically, rather than insisting they fit through the standard one. She thought often about Mr. Vinievsky during those years, not with bitterness. She had passed through bitterness a long time ago and come out the other side of it. She thought about him with something closer to understanding. He had been a good teacher. He had genuinely cared about his students. He had spent 30 years helping children learn to play piano, and he had developed, through all those years, a clear picture of what ability looked like and how it developed. The problem was not that his picture was wrong. It was that it was incomplete. Hania had not fit his picture, and so he had concluded she did not belong in it, when the truth was simply that the picture needed to be wider. She saw that pattern everywhere once she started looking for it. In schools, in sports, in music, in countless places where children are measured early and sorted quickly and told yes or no before anyone has taken the time to understand how they specifically learn, how they specifically grow, what specific door they need in order to walk into the thing they love. The sorting is not done with cruelty most of the time. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people who have never been on the wrong side of it. It is done by people who are trying to be efficient, trying to be kind, trying to direct children toward things they will succeed at. But efficiency is not always wisdom, and the absence of cruelty does not automatically mean the absence of harm. Hania's story spread, as stories sometimes do, not through any announcement or effort on her part, but through the quiet network of parents who talk to other parents, teachers who mention a name to other teachers, children who go home from a session and tell a parent that someone finally understood. She was asked to speak at a conference for music educators when she was 27. She almost said no. She was not comfortable with stages, even still. But she said yes. She spoke about what it felt like to be told you have no talent for the thing you love most. She spoke about the years of trying in the wrong direction. She spoke about a diagnosis that changed not her ability, but her understanding of herself. She spoke about feeling first and notes second. She spoke about a grandmother with an old piano in a dim apartment and a cup of tea going cold on a side table, and a question that turned out to be the most important thing anyone ever asked her. The room was full of music teachers, people who had spent their careers in the same position Mr. Vinievsky had occupied, assessing, correcting, guiding, deciding. She did not tell them they had been doing it wrong. She did not come to the stage with blame or anger or a list of failures. She came with the only thing that had ever actually helped her, which was honesty. She told them the truth of her experience and let them do with it what they chose. Several of them came up to her afterwards. One woman, older, with silver hair, and the posture of someone who had been standing in front of students for decades, held Hania's hand for a moment and said quietly, "I think I have done what your teacher did, more than once, and I am sorry for it." Hania looked at her. "Go back," she said. "If you can. Go back and find the ones who left." She drove home from the conference in the early evening, through the streets of Warsaw, past the building where her grandmother had lived. Zofia had passed away 2 years earlier, at 81, peacefully in her own apartment, in the room with the piano. The piano had gone to Hania. It was in her living room now, the old upright with the yellowed keys and hell, the pedal that still stuck if you pressed it too hard. She played it that evening when she got home. She played the Nocturne, slowly, fully, from beginning to end, with the late light coming through the window and the apartment quiet around her. She played it for Zofia. She played it for the 7-year-old who had first sat on a bench too tall for her feet to reach the floor, and pressed a single key and felt something she could not name but could not leave alone. She played it for every child sitting somewhere right now in front of something they love, being told the distance between them and it is too far to cross. It is not. That is the whole lesson. That is the entire thing, the only thing, the thing that all the years and all the struggle and all the small lights and long corridors were always pointing toward. A distance is not permanent. It only feels that way before you find the right road. And somewhere, in a question asked quietly by someone who loves you, in a room with plants on every windowsill and too many cold cups of tea, in the moment you stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to understand yourself instead, that road is waiting. It has been there all along.